morning, dear people of the internet, and welcome to sheep, and sheep's wool specifically. That wonderful fluffy stuff that is in your clothes, in your walls, and in your gardens. I will get back to the gardens and the walls, I will explain that later. But I love spinning wool and using yarn to knit and crochet, obviously. But I also love sheep a lot. They are so fluffy, why won't I love sheep? So I felt like a little bit of a hypocrite, because I've been told that wool is a very sustainable thing. It goes a long way, and sheep are a natural thing, and whatever. But on the other hand, the agricultural industry is very not sustainable at all, so I was kind of confused. So I decided that it is finally time to dive into this and figure out what is going on and how we can use wool in an ethical way, according to my opinion, of course. Here's a little bit of a spoiler for you. It's not all doom and gloom. So I will get to the doom and gloom as well, but we'll end in a nice note, and I will give you some tips on how to do stuff and how I do stuff. I started this research for an assignment in my comic design degree because we had a project called graphic journalism, and I decided it was time to research this because it's fun, and I got to hang out with sheep and wool people for an entire week, so why not? Because of this, I'm also going to be releasing a little zine about my research and with illustrations of sheep and wool, and who doesn't want that? It's not done yet, I cannot show you it yet, but if you follow along on here, you can find out when it is gonna be available and get it if you want it. And you can also support me for free by subscribing and watching my videos if you like them, and I would appreciate that a lot because student loans are a thing, okay? Now, let's start with where this comes from, the sheep. A while ago, I read that most Dutch sheep wool was thrown away every single year. Now, for context, I am from the Netherlands, if you didn't know that, and otherwise you do now. So most of this will be about Dutch sheep, but I did look up some things about sheep on a global level and wool on a global level, so please take the Dutch sheep as an example. It is believed that people started breeding sheep for their wool around 16,000 before Christ in Western Asia. So it sounds really sad and counterproductive that we're just throwing away most of this wool right now, at least in my country. The Netherlands has about 600,000 sheep that produce over 1.5 million kilograms of wool every single year, probably even a lot more than that. It's kind of hard to get all these numbers because there's so many different kinds of sheep here, and every kind of sheep has a different amount of wool that is usable for different stuff, so it's kind of hard to get straight up numbers, but we're throwing away a lot. And for context, you can make a sweater with less than 1 kilogram of wool. You can maybe get even 2 sweaters out of 1 kilogram of wool, depending on the size, of course, and a lot of other things. And that also means that Dutch sheep are producing about 1.5 million sweaters a year together, or more. Now, that's by far not enough to give everyone of the Dutch population a sweater every single year from Dutch sheep, but it's still a lot, especially since Dutch people don't have time and money to process all of this, so it's just thrown away. You can do so much more with wool than just making clothes, and not all wool is good for making clothes anyway. This wool can be used to make isolation materials, for example, which is how it can end up in your walls. Nowadays, it's much cheaper to make that out of synthetic materials, so it's done less and less, but it is an option. This wool is also used to make fertilizer pellets, for example, which is how it can end up in your garden. So why aren't we doing this? And this is not just a Dutch problem, by the way. I've looked it up. In the US, it's about the same, and it really depends on what kind of sheep a country has and what kind of clothing industry and wool processing industry a country has. Not a lot of countries have both a big wool processing industry and a big clothing industry. So in the countries that don't have this, this is pretty much the problem that is going on. Outside of a few other countries that mostly breed merino sheep, but we'll get to the merino sheep. First of all, most sheep in most countries are meat sheep. The wool of most meat sheep is very coarse and it's not usable for spinning because of that. Or it is, but if you make a sweater out of that, it's gonna be a very itchy sweater and nobody likes that. So what is important here is the diameter of the wool. The finer the wool is, the nicer your sweater will be, the softer it will be. During my research, I've been told that anything beneath 18 microns in diameter is great for spinning in sweaters, and anything above 20 microns can better be used for something else. Now, you can use the wool from meat sheep for a lot of other things, as I told you, but the processing of this takes a lot of time and equipment, and in many countries, it's just not economically smart to do that, to start a business like that. It won't get you a lot of money, and it will cost you a lot of money, so people just don't do that. Now, before COVID, we had a solution for that. We would send the wool to China because they were asking for it, and they will process it over there because they have a huge wool processing industry in China. But after COVID, the Chinese companies that were doing this did not demand this wool anymore, so we kind of cannot anymore. We still are sending it to China for a little bit, but not all of it because it's too much. This is intertwined with another problem. Before the rising of synthetic materials, sheep shearers would go to the farmers, ask the farmers if they could shear the sheep, and then take the wool with them. They would basically buy the wool of the sheep of the farmers. Since the rise of synthetic materials, starting in the 1950s, this has changed. It's now literally the other way around. The farmer has to make sure that a sheep shearer can come over even. The farmer has to pay the sheep shearer, and the sheep shearer is not taking the wool with them anymore. There is a company that takes the wool of the farmers, no matter what kind of wool this is, but they only get a very low price for the white wool, and they have to pay for the grey and darker wool. I'm sure it is because white wool is easier to dye, but it is also very sad because grey wool can be beautiful. Like, this is naturally dark brown greyish wool, I think, because I got this with my spinning wheel and it was just on there randomly, but it is beautiful. And these farmers have to bring the wool to the company drop-off points themselves, which takes a lot of time and effort, so sometimes it's just not worth doing so. Farmers of meat sheep are most often very economically motivated, and dealing with the wool is not really economically motivating to them, so often the wool just sits in storage, or even worse, just gets burnt or thrown out or whatever. That happens a lot, and it's kind of sad. On the other side, we have wool sheep. There are more kinds of sheep than just meat sheep and wool sheep, of course, but for this video they are the most relevant. If you're into fiber arts, you have probably heard of merino sheep. They mostly live in South America, South Africa, Australia and New Zealand. In most cases their wool gets mixed and processed in China, which would be fine if it weren't for a few things. In New Zealand and Australia there's a fly that can give sheep a parasite infection in their skin, most likely in their butt area because they are more attracted to that part, probably for reasons you can imagine. To avoid this, some of the sheep go through a process called mulesing. I'm not going to explain what that is because it's gruesome, and if you want to you can look it up for yourself, but it is bad. That's all you need to know. Luckily this has been happening less and less, and also there's now a certification for mulesing free wool. It's called the Responsible Wool Standard, and it accounts for more than just mulesing free. It also accounts for just ethically held sheep and all that kind of thing. So that's great. Look out for that. The other thing about merino sheep is that they're often held on an industrial level, which means that it's not some sheep loving person having the sheep, but there are just big amounts of sheep and it's more about the money than the sheep and the wool. This means that in these kinds of farms, sheep only often live to be 3 to 6 years old, because when sheep get older, just like humans, their hair becomes thinner and people don't want that in their wool, or people do, but it's not enough for the farmers anymore. So then they slaughter the sheep, and that's, I think, not great, because sheep can often live to be between 10 and 12 years old if they let them live, and some sheep kinds have even been known to live beyond 20 years old. So 3 to 6 is really young for sheep to end their lives. There are more problems, but they are in the same vein as these, and they come down to this. Knowing all of this, are there ways to use wool in an ethical way? Well, the short answer is yes. I think, in my personal opinion, it kind of depends on your beliefs and your principles, but I think there is, and I'm going to tell you all about it. The first way is to just pay attention to what you buy. I already mentioned the Responsible Wool Standard, so you can look out for that. And in this process, I also talked to an indie wool dyer. Shout out to the We Yarn company, by the way. They are amazing. And he told me that most indie dyers of wool look out for the quality of the wool, because better treated sheep also give better quality wool. It's as simple as that. That's great because it's better for everyone. And also because he genuinely cares about the sheep, and most indie wool dyers do, and all the customers do too, so they ask this question. So that's great. Not all indie wool dyers are like this, by the way, so you will have to look out, but there's probably a clause on the website that explains where the wool comes from, and you should look out for that. Indie dyed wool is very expensive though, and I actually have 3 responses to that. First of all, the price makes an awful lot of sense if you account for the time it takes to do everything and to genuinely put the care in the process. So I think the price makes sense. The price is not too high. It's still expensive, but it's not too high. Second of all, I feel like a lot of people in the fiber arts community look at their craft as, I'm making a shirt and it's costing me so much, so the shirt costs that much. But I would invite you, I guess, to look at it differently. You are paying for your hobby. If you go to dance classes, you may pay $60 or 60 euros a dance class, and that's a lot. There are cheaper dance classes, by the way. But say that you pay 30 euros for a pair of socks, and you take 2 to 3 weeks to make them, and you have dance lessons every single week. You will come out at about the same price, or even the sock making hobby might be even cheaper. For example, I paid 50 euros a lesson for my violin lesson for an hour every other week when I was still going to my violin lessons. So hobbies are expensive, and knitting or crocheting is also a hobby, and so you pay for the hobby rather than the end product. That's just a bonus. That's how I look at it. It can be more combined or whatever. But the real question here is, what do you want to pay and what can you pay for your hobby? And third of all, maybe you can't afford that. I also cannot always afford that, and that's really fine and understandable. So a second option would be to go to a thrift store and see if you can find any wool clothes there. If you find wool clothes there that are made of a nice yarn, you can unravel it and reuse it. I've never tried that myself, so that's a little disclaimer here. But I've seen people on the internet do this and it looks really fun. So you can try that if you're into that. The third option is the most amount of time and the most nuanced, complicated thing. That's just buying a chunk of wool like this and processing it yourself. That is also an option. Now that might seem really overwhelming. I was very overwhelmed at first as well, and I still am a little bit because I still have this to go through and I already worked on this for a while. So I will walk you through it and we can process it together. The first thing you need is wool, obviously. I bought all of this for 9 euros, which is not a lot because this is 1 kilogram. Like, this is more than one sweater. I spent 9 euros on this, excluding shipping. You can probably find a lot of places online to buy this. I find a few in the US and Germany as well, and you can also try if you can contact local sheep farmers or shepherds also, because those exist as well and they are often great and really caring for sheep and wool. I also spoke with a shepherd this week and it was absolutely great, and I will put the video of the sheep here. Anyhow, you can try to contact those if you can buy off their wool, but you do have to do that in sheep shearing season because of the sheep. It will be sold pretty quickly and it's very seasonal. Also, for smaller farming situations, you will have to get this in sheep shearing season. You're looking for raw, unwashed wool, sheep's wool specifically. If you type that into the search bar, you will get it. So this is unwashed, but they did shear it in a way that there's not a lot of hay and whatever sticking out. They were careful with the sheep and also with the place where they were shearing the sheep, so look out for that. But it shouldn't be too hard to find it. Probably. As I said, I don't know this for all countries. The second step is spinning it. You can wash it first, but you don't have to. I chose not to because I don't want to deal with loose wool in a bath of water or putting it in washing bags and everything. You can, but you don't have to. Just your hands will get very fatty while you're spinning, but that's fine, I think. Now, I am aware that spinning wheels are really expensive. I was lucky. I have a spinning wheel and I got it because my grandma's friend had one in their attic and they wanted to sell it or give it away, and then they gave it to me for free, which I'm so incredibly grateful for, by the way, and I was so incredibly lucky. But they are expensive, and you can try to find one secondhand on places like Facebook Marketplace, which will also require a bit of luck, and those are probably still expensive as well. The cheapest spinning wheels that are new out there are made by a company called Loyan. It's a good company. I went to a spinning place where they sold those, and the person would highly recommend them, and I have also a spinning wheel not by them, but they are by the same, like, there were people that had a spinning wheel company called Duet, and that's where my spinning wheel is from, and then they stopped that to make cheaper spinning wheels, and the company is now called Loyan, and the spinning wheels look very basic, but they work very greatly. So if you want, that's the cheapest one. The price range of the cheapest ones is between 400 and 500 euros, so that's still very expensive, and I get that. Even though I think that it's worth saving up for a spinning wheel, I also get that not everyone can do that. I also couldn't at this moment in time, so sometimes it's just not a possibility. A far cheaper option is a spindle like this one. This one cost me about 15 euros. They also exist in wider price ranges. This is a fairly cheap one, and it works pretty well. I spun this on my spindle. I like using it still because it's easier to take away and use in the train or when I'm slouching on my couch. I also like to use this, so that's an option as well. The problem is that it takes an entire century to spin this. Like, this little bit took me a couple of hours. So there is that. But you can make a spindle yourself as well. There are lots of tutorials out here on this app. You can find them to make a spindle yourself out of a stick and some materials you were probably going to throw away. So that can be a very cheap option if you're into that. Now, you technically don't have to do anything with the wool before you're going to spin it, provided that you know how to spin. I'm not going to explain how to spin because I'm a beginner myself, and there are a lot more experienced people that can explain you how to spin very well with any tool on this platform. So that's your own responsibility, I think. Anyhow, there are many ways to prepare the wool to spin, even though you don't technically have to. I do like it when all the fibers are lined up in the same way. And I do that by using these hand carders that came with my spinning wheel. These are also very expensive, by the way. So again, very grateful to have them. But there is a cheaper option for this, and that is using two fine duck combs. You can get them at the pet store. I've seen people on Reddit recommend this. For them, it seemed like it was working, so that's an option as well. You have more expensive, faster options like drum cutters and whatever, but those are really out of anyone's price range. Well, not anyone's, but mine definitely, and maybe yours too. That's about the spinning part. After spinning the wool, you can wind it on your arm or on a niddy noddy, which is also a tool that, again, can be relatively expensive. The cheapest I found is also by Loyan, and it's 30 euros, and you can also make it yourself. A very kind follower of mine on TikTok recommended me to make one using 3 sticks, and they also sent a picture of how they did that themselves, and I have yet to try that. When I try this, I will make a short about this because I plan on trying it. So you can make that yourself as well, but you can also just wind it on your arm like that. After that, you need to wash it, which you will need a bucket, warm water, some dish soap that is pH neutral, but pretty much all normal dish soap that you can get in the grocery store is pH neutral, and a towel. You probably already have all those things, so you can get very far with those things. After that, you will have wool or yarn that you can use. I did ply this, which means that I had 2 spun threads and I plied them together. That makes it more stable and less curly, so I did that. You can just work with this. Probably needs to be washed again. I did not do that yet because I am going to dye this, because if you have just this or in gray, whatever you want, you might want a nice color. That can be done cheaply as well. Now, I have not tried dyeing yarn ever before, but I do know there's more to the process than just dunking this in a bath of dye. You need to prepare it and whatever. The internet will help you with that, and I will also show you once I get to that, because I first want to have more of this before I start the dyeing process. But you can do that for cheap. You don't need expensive dyes. I've learned from the spinning person that I went to that the cheapest options and the most nice options that you can use are plants that you cannot eat or food scraps that you do not eat. For example, if you want a purple reddish color, you shouldn't use beets, but you should use red onion skins, and that will give you that color, and it will stay like that even if you put it in the laundry. So that's good to know, and I'm going to dye this with cow parsley, which we have a lot of in my country, and it's seen as a weed. So I will look into the place where I get it and whatever before I get it. It's just now in season and it will be until June, so I have time for that. And allegedly that's going to give a nice mossy green color, which I obviously love a lot. Dyeing doesn't have to be expensive as well. A lot of places recommend getting an expensive dye pen or whatever. You can use your regular pots for that, but you do have to A, pay attention, and B, not use them for food anymore. The downside of processing wool like this, as I said, is that it's extremely time consuming. This one skein, I don't know how much it is, but it took me 11 hours. I don't have a yarn winder. That probably would have knocked off about 2 or 3 hours of the process, but it still took a lot, and I still have this left, like this part is taken out. So it does take a lot of time. However, for me, it's very worth it. I do have the opinion that if you're a crafter, everything can be part of the process and everything about it can be fun, but if you really hate spinning, I get that you're not going to want to try that, but I would highly recommend trying it and see where you end up with it. There's also a lot of places that just do workshops with spinning wheels and also spindles, so maybe that's an option for you and you can try that. Well, that was my sheep and wool project. If you want to know more about the zine that's coming out or the process of all of this, I will show that in shorts, probably, mostly. I'm planning on making a sweater out of this, but we'll see how that goes. It's gonna take so long, and I'm both looking forward to it as still slightly intimidated, but that's okay. Anyways, if you want to see that, I do recommend subscribing because any updates will be on my feed here. Thank you for watching. If you like my little video, please press the wonderful shiny like and subscribe buttons, and then I will see you next time. Ciao!